When you play the Game of Thrones, you
Subscribe and like.
or you die. There is no middle ground.
All right, hello YouTube. Welcome back to the Grease Comedy YouTube channel. Today's video, we're going to be continuing our Song of Ice and Fire reread, and it's specifically a Game of Thrones. And today we'll be talking about Dany V, a Game of Thrones. This chapter is pretty much the climax of Dany's entire arc throughout this first book. And again, it's been quite a while since we've gotten her. Again, in the first book, she's someone that, especially in the first half, the second half, she starts picking up. She gets a lot more chapters. But in the first half of the book, she really is very far in between. Like, we're with her, and then a lot of time seems to pass, and then we jump back into her again. And so her whole arc really leading up to this moment has been about her relationship with Viserys. How Viserys keeps pushing and pushing Dany further away. But Dany still makes excuses for him, you know, still cares about him. And that's going to be very present. That's really going to be a conflicting point of this story, and this chapter specifically. And, you know, we're finally getting to page 500. This really is a very important chapter. And it's really interesting given that it's really the first time that we see kind of a major character die. A lot of people like to think about that with Ned, but Viserys is a staple to Daenerys' arc so far in the story. And this is his death chapter, right? So very important chapter. And yeah, before we get into it all, though, if you guys would like to subscribe to learn more about this world and this content, or just to continue on this with this reread. But yeah, let's get into it. We're going to be starting on page 489. Also, actually, before we get into the page, I just want to give you guys a catch up. Just remember the last thing going into this chapter that we see from Dany is that Viserys is invited to this dinner with Dany, and he just completely throws it in her face and disrespects Dany, and Dany finally hits him, basically pushes him away from her. And basically that's the last we kind of see of this relationship. And so you almost get the feeling that maybe Dany has completely taken Viserys out of her life, but that isn't really the case, as we're going to come to realize within this chapter. So getting into the page in the chapter, it opens with Drogo giving her the heart of a stallion, and the bloody and raw heart is put in front of her to eat. Dany notes how she must not show fear or be afraid, as the Dosh Khaleen are watching her every movement. As she is sweating, she takes the heart in both hands and takes her first bite. A really kind of dark open, as we're coming into Dany having to eat this raw piece of meat. Very not good, not healthy whatsoever, and just nasty. And Dany has to eat this whole thing, which is kind of crazy to think about. But warm blood fills her mouth. The taste was enough to gag her, but she had to keep going. The Dothraki believed if a mother ate the whole heart without issue, her son would be strong, swift, and fearless. If she did not, the omens were less favorable, as a child will become stillborn, deformed, or a female. Again, it kind of shows the issue with being a woman in this society. Like, yes, there are benefits, right? Even in this Dothraki culture where, you know, women are kind of put on a bit of a pedestal at times, but at other times are not, right? Having a female as a child is not good. You want males. That's something that's even part of Westerosi culture. You want more males, not females. Like, yes, females have their role in society, like making marriage alliances and having children, but you definitely want males. That's kind of what has been pushed on this society. But the fact that the Dothraki culture really emphasizes strength, that again, you have to, as a woman, eat this entire heart. It shows like a really how the Dothraki look at strength, that even their women must be extremely strong to live this in this society, given again how you're writing constantly and all of those things. But that'll get us into page 490. Moving into page 490, Dany thinks how she's been preparing for this despite her stomach the last 2 months. Again, she's pregnant. She is someone that is having those issues with what she can eat, what she can't eat. She has been consuming half-clotted blood to get accustomed to the taste, and eating dried strips of horse flesh until her jaw ached. Not very pleasant, as I think many of us can agree. Alongside of this, she has starved herself for a day and night, hoping the hunger would help her get the heart down. Again, if you have nothing in your stomach to throw up, maybe that'll help. It seems like it does the trick for Dany in this moment, but who knows? The stallion's heart also was pure muscle, making it difficult to eat as she had to chew each bite for a long time. And also, there was no daggers or knives or anything that she could use to cut up this meat or this heart, so she had to do it with her fingers and her teeth. Drogo, the whole time, stood over her looking fierce as usual. Whenever Dany saw her strength leaving, she would look at him and chew and swallow, and this would go on for quite some time. And even one of the times she thought she saw some pride in Drogo, which he, again, probably was feeling. Again, Dany is very foreign to this culture. She's an outsider, and she has been making herself very accustomed to it and trying to learn. But another thing we kind of pick up on in this chapter is Dany and Drogo's relationship specifically. They seem to have gotten a lot closer. And that's made very apparent within this chapter multiple times throughout. But she also notes that his face rarely betrayed his thoughts. He was someone that was very stern. He didn't really have a lot of those emotions on his face. He kept his thoughts well guarded. But finally, she was done and said that a prince rides inside me. And one of the Dosh Khaleen responded saying, "The prince is riding." But that'll get us into page 491. Other women begin to take up the chant, saying he is riding, and they say, "A boy, a strong boy." Bells then rang, and a war horn was blown, and the Dosh Khaleen chant, and smoke is made, and Dany notes how the Dothraki believe the stars are horses of fire galloping across the sky. But we also see that this is kind of a ritual, right? Like, the oldest Dosh Khaleen member that we see at this time, she's going to kind of look into the smoke to predict the future. And this is so important that we even see like Drogo is actively very nervous, because again, when you have this culture that is really attuned to these signs, like again, omens, right? When the omens will dictate when a cow will do war or things of that nature. They are very religious people, regardless of what you think of their religion or their culture. They are very religious. So something like this is actually vital to Drogo. And so we even see that. But as the smoke ascended, all grew quiet. Again, very important moment, as they waited on the oldest woman with her eye closed, waiting for her prophecy. Again, it shows the tension in the room, but Drogo lays his hand on her shoulder, as Dany notes a good or bad vision of the future from the smoke. Like, there could be something great here, but also be something horrible. And that is what Drogo is so nervous about. But finally, she speaks, pronouncing him the stallion who mounts the world. All will tremble before him and ask Dany what his name will be. And again, it shows a lot here that they do respect their women in this culture a bit, because again, they're allowing Dany to make the name here. Drogo has really no say in the name. This is all Dany. Drogo, after this fact, is going to ask about the name. So that's all for Dany, right? There is some power for women in this society. Because even if you think about like Westerosi society, a lot of the times, even though it is the woman that is, giving birth, it's the man that is going to name the child, right? If we look at Rhaegar and his children with Elia, it was him naming them. Elia really didn't have anything to do with it. I know that's not true in all cases, but a lot of the times I think it is that way. But yeah, so Dany names her child Rhaego. And this, again, kind of just shows how influential Rhaegar was. Like, Dany never knew Rhaegar, but she's heard the stories about him, who he was, how he was kind of this last dragon figure, how he was so handsome, or he was able to play the harp really well, and he sang really well, and he was a good fighter, and he had a tragic death on the trident. It really shows like how his name carries a lot of weight even to Dany in this moment. But that'll get us into page 492. But at this, the Khalasar began to chant Rhaego's name. The name was still ringing in her ears as Drogo led her outside. She notes how the Dosh Khaleen were all once Khaleesi's and were sent here after their Khal died. As well, that even the strongest Khals bowed to them, but Dany was not pleased to think that she may have to join them one day, whether she wanted to or not. Could be for some foreshadowing that the Khalasar that ends up, capturing her or running into her at the end of Dance will maybe bring her there, because again, that is part of their culture. And Dany, again, is not going to want to do that, right? That doesn't really seem like a good life. You basically are rotting away with a bunch of old women. Doesn't seem like a great life. It's better than a lot of others, given that the Dothraki, rape and pillage a lot of villages and things like that. But, but they are, again, leaving to go to this lake but others follow them like other cows, and they continue down the God's way. Drogo, again, like I alluded to earlier, asks what the meaning of their son's name is in the common tongue. Again, it shows a lot of things here because Drogo is someone that's very progressive, right? He is probably one of the few Dothraki cows in history to ever like learn the common tongue, or at least to attempt to. So it one shows that, but it two shows his devotion to Dany, trying to understand her actual language, really shows that. And then just three, just again, him generally being one of the most probably progressive cows of all time. Marrying Dany was, again, really important in that aspect. The way he's going to go about, going forward, how with Dany and all that. So just shows a lot of that right there. Also, just how he's able to pick up this language very quickly is something that Dany notes as well. Now, with this being said, his common tongue is not something that many people are actually able to pick up on, as it's very barbaric in his tone and all that, but Dany understands, so it can't be that bad. But Dany then explains it was for her brother, who was a great warrior, and from what Jorah tells her, the last of the dragons. Drogo says it is a good name and calls her the moon of his life. Again, just showing more of that connection between the two. Getting into page 493, they rode to the Lake of the Womb, where apparently the first man upon a horse rode out of. Everyone then waited as she stripped naked. She had been told there was no bottom of the lake, but that was not true. So again, she has to go into this lake to, again, cleanse her and her child, and well as this being another kind of religious thing for their culture. But when she entered the lake, she felt the mud below, and she went into the lake to about hip height, and then cupped the water over her head, cleanse her and her son. She heard the Dosh Khaleen talking amongst themselves, and wondered what they were saying. Something else I do want to point out that I didn't actually mention earlier is that she doesn't know what the stallion who mounts the world actually means at this time. So she doesn't actually understand how important it was to get that prophecy. Like, that's the best possible outcome for someone like Drogo, right? And even her, right? Because it places so much importance on her as a person. But when she emerged from the lake shivering, her handmaiden rushed to her, but Drogo waved her off. He was feeling a little lusty at this point, seeing her naked, notes like looking at her body with approval, and he gets aroused, and Dany and Drogo have some quick spicy sex right there in front of everyone. Kind of interesting. Again, just shows how the Dothraki are. They do everything in front of the Khalasar. They have like no privacy in that regard. Again, nice throwback to when Dany and Drogo's relationship really started, when Dany kind of took control of Drogo and all of that. So it's a nice little kind of callback to that moment, I believe in Dany 3. But after Drogo was done taking his pleasure, she was then wrapped up and allowed slippers. As Drogo was lacing up, he called for their horses, and the two set off down the God's Way, which leads us into page 494. Moving on, they enter Drogo's hall, which is already crowded with people, as there's to be a great feast celebrating their child. There's food cooking, and all of this is being done under the open sky, as a silk tent blocking the sky had been rolled back. Again, just another callback. Everything done under the open sky that is important is done under it. So just again, more just reminder of that. But many people shouted to Dany about her good health with the child and how her son is the stallion who mounts the world. Again, Dany still does not understand what this means yet. But I want to point something out when we look at Viserys. Given that this is going to be Viserys' last chapter, and it's really important to understand the differences between the two characters at this point, and this is really what we've been building up to every time I talk about Viserys, is Dany is getting all this praise from everyone, right? Everyone seems to love her. She is, one of the most powerful people right now. And Viserys has none of that. Viserys is this person that's thought he should be getting all this, and that's all he's ever really wanted is just some acknowledgement, something like that. And, he has a lot of character flaws. That's true. But he also has a very tragic life. And, him seeing Dany like this is only going to make those things worse because it's what he feels like he deserves. And again, it's just everything that Viserys has never really received in his life. Food then began being served, and there were dancing women for entertainment, but Dany notes no bloodshed will happen tonight in Vaes Dothrak. Again, you can't shed blood in Vaes Dothrak, and so that just makes sense. Drogo and Dany then dismount and take their places, and Dany looks for Viserys, as again, he should stand out like a sore thumb. He has very pale skin, his hair, his clothes, but he's not present here. But at this, she spots Jorah and gestures and says to come up to the front and asks for him to sit with her. But that'll get us into page 495. She asks Jorah where Viserys is. He should be at the feast by now. Jorah says he saw him this morning and that he was going to the West Market for wine. Dany notes Viserys had never liked the mare's milk, which is basically the alcoholic drink for the Dothraki, which again, makes sense. Viserys is not assimilating into Dothraki culture. He thinks he's above them, and so he's going to find things that are better, the things that he's more accustomed to, people he understands. And Dany also notes that he seemed to prefer the company of these traders more than her, which again makes sense. These traders are going to be, more Westerosi, more common tongue, maybe more, friendly to Viserys, more, again, people like him. And so the thing of here is also Dany, I don't think she understands that relationship with Viserys is fractured, right? Think about their last interaction. They were threatening each other. And so I think it makes a lot of sense as to why Viserys doesn't really want to be around her anymore. And again, you also look at Viserys, who's growing even more jealous of Dany, because why wouldn't he be? Dany's getting all this praise, all this power, people love her, and Viserys gets none. So again, it just makes sense, in my opinion, as to why Viserys is kind of staying away there. But more importantly, this is what this tells us, though. Dany still cares about Viserys quite a lot, even through everything. And that's important to understand as we go further into this chapter. Jorah confirms wine, and also he had a notion to gain sellswords to his cause, which is really stupid. Given Viserys has no money, why would anyone support him? This is exactly what Dany thinks about, right? Is that wise? He has no gold to pay them, and caravan guards had doubtful loyalty to begin with. She says that Jorah should have gone with him, as he is his sworn sword. She also thinks how Robert would pay well for Viserys' head. Again, all great points by Dany. But Jorah reminds her that no man can carry a weapon or shed a man's blood in Vaes Dothrak. Again, foreshadowing to later, given that Viserys is going to wield a sword, and also the way he dies is not because of blood. Dany talks about how there are other ways a man could die, like poison. Again, more foreshadowing to two things, actually, how someone's going to try and poison Dany, and also how there's other ways to die outside of bloodshed. But Jorah shrugs this off, saying that hopefully Viserys is stupid and does not try to steal from them. He continues saying how he had planned to steal her dragon eggs, but Jorah said if he had tried, he would have cut his hands off. Which is interesting, because now we have a new revelation, right? Where we've had this relationship where Dany and Viserys have had their struggles, but now Viserys is actively trying to steal from Dany, and Dany is going to have a very interesting response. And something else I want to note here is we just see Viserys' growing desperation. He's understanding the situation is getting worse and worse for him. The Dothraki people look down on him, don't like him at all, and Dany seems to be growing more distant from him. And so this is going to be interesting because Dany is shocked by this. They were hers, and they were just mere stones. She doesn't really understand the value here. Jorah notes that, again, these stones are valuable. Look at other stones in the world that are valuable, like jewels. But dragon eggs are by far more valuable. Viserys could buy as many sellswords as he required with them. He could do quite a lot with them, buy ships and things of that nature. But Dany had never even suspected, which is interesting. And I don't think it's like, oh, that doesn't make any sense, but it is interesting to think Dany never thought about this, right? How rare are dragon eggs? Dragons haven't been seen in a long time. Of course, these are going to be rare. It's just something she really never considered. But either way, she says that Viserys is her brother and king. He should have them. He only needs ask. Again, we see that Dany still cares about Viserys, that she's still willing to do things that maybe make him happier, and she still thinks that he is the king. That's very interesting, given the way the last chapter kind of played out, that she still is loyal to him to a degree. But this begs an even bigger question. If Lirio really cared to actually put Viserys on the throne, he would have just given the eggs to Viserys so he could buy an army, not to Dany. And that's something Dany doesn't even think about in this moment. But Jorah acknowledges that he is your brother true, but nothing else. Again, pointing out to the fact that Viserys is powerless. He is nothing at this point. Again, when you think about when people make really bad decisions, usually, looking at what Viserys is going to do, it's out of desperation. It's out of having nothing left to lose. Like, Viserys has nothing. Dany says he is all she has left. If it wasn't for him, she would know nothing. Again, we are still seeing how she is defending him, trying to protect him, but this is very human. It doesn't matter. Like, think about abusive relationships. This is really great because I think this does a really good job of exploring that. It's like, Dany doesn't know anything else, right? If she loses Viserys, she has no family left. But Jorah kind of counters this, noting he was all you have, but now you have the Dothraki, you're the Khaleesi, right? These are your people. You know, you have Drogo. And in her womb rides the stallion who mounts the world. And this is where Dany finally gets to the point, like asking what that means. And Jorah tells her it was an old prophecy that said the man would be the one to unite all the Dothraki, and the people in the world would be his herd. And Dany notes how she named him Rhaego. Interesting because she's thinking about this like, oh, wait, I just named the person that's going to be like king of the world after Rhaegar, and Robert's still on the throne. And Jorah even notes that, right? It was a name that would make Robert's blood run cold. But suddenly, Doria's noting that her brother has arrived. Dany could tell the wine had gotten to his head, as he has a drunk man's courage. So now you have, again, this character of Viserys, who at this point is extremely desperate. He's pretty much has nothing to lose at this point. And you have him under the influence. And you're going to be seeing Dany at her highest, where she's being her most praised. There's this great feast basically in her name and her son's name. And he just can't take it anymore, right? He just loses it. And the actions he does, it's not justified because of those things. But it's understanding why he gets to this point, and it's, goes on much earlier in the beginning chapters for Dany to understand why this happens, and we get to this point. But he was wearing his beggar's clothes, all dirty and destroyed, his hair a mess, and on his hip a sword. Again, it just shows this image of a broken person. He's just beaten down by life, and this is really where that's going. The Dothraki instantly take note of him, and the tone changes to silence and anger as he strides by, because no sword is permitted to be, wielded or, had in Vaes Dothrak. This is already bad signs. Plus, people just don't like him to begin with. But a sense of dread fills her, and she commands Jorah to go to him and bring him here, and then he can have the eggs. But let's think about this. Viserys is already jealous of her power, and now here's the difference, right? Viserys was okay with taking the eggs because it was on his power. It was him doing the action. But now that Dany is allowing Viserys, it's more like Dany is in the power. She's the queen, ordering around and allowing Viserys to have things. That's a different circumstance. Viserys, again, he's the king. He's the dragon. He doesn't want to be talked down to like that by his sister, he is abused and talked down to and physically abused her entire life. That's why this makes him so angry as well. He then begins to make it worse as he asks where Dany is, and he is here for her feast, and that none should eat without the dragon. He's stopped by the largest of the fire pits, and very few here spoke common tongue, but everyone could see the state of his drunkenness. Jorah was on him, whispering in his ear, but Viserys wrenched free, saying no one touches the dragon without leave. But Dany notes Drogo and the other two cows as they are laughing at Viserys, and that draws his attention, right? Viserys has had enough. He's been laughed at, scorned by the Dothraki, shamed multiple times. But Viserys notes he is here for the feast. Drogo and Dothraki then says something and points to the back of the hall, and Jorah translates this to saying his place is not here to Viserys. Yeah, not great, because now you even have it to where Drogo is basically saying you don't belong here, right? You deserve to be all the way in the back in a place of very low honor and respect. So it's the other part of this is like you have Viserys, who all these other things that we're talking about, but now it's like you're also attacking his pride. You know, you're going after things that is one of the easiest things to manipulate a person when it comes to a man specifically, their pride, right? We are just prideful people. And that's exactly what Drogo is hitting on. And that's something that also is going to go into why Viserys, you know, makes things worse. Like, he goes a step further. But Viserys says that that is no place for a king. And Drogo responds, it is a place for the sore-foot king, and that Shay should bring him a cart. Again, now not only has his pride been wounded, but he's actively being used as a joke, as the whole room is erupting into laughter. And it's so weird because George does such a great job with these characters we don't particularly like, but we can sympathize with them, right? Like, Cersei is someone, when we have her walk of atonement, we can sympathize with her. We feel bad for her, even though we know she's such a horrible person. Viserys is kind of the same way, where he's just getting talked down to. He just wants some, you know, acknowledgement, and now he's being made as a joke. But this, Viserys takes it again too far. He's had enough. And Jorah was screaming in his ear, trying to calm him down. Presumably, Dany could not hear as it was so far away. And again, everybody was laughing. But the two go grappling to the ground, and Viserys pulls out his sword. A massive crime invades Dothrak, and it meant his death. The Dothraki begin to curse, and Viserys wields it over his head, telling Jorah to get back. Again, we see the theme come back. We've talked about it in so many different chapters, whether that's with Robb, Jon, Joffrey, any of these major characters, of wielding a sword when you're not prepared to use it. You're too young, you don't understand what it means, and here it is with Viserys. It comes back, but this time it has a consequence. It means his death. But Dany gave a wordless cry of terror. She knew what this meant, even if Viserys did not. She calls to him, and that brought his attention. Dany tells him to put his sword away, and there's food and drink, and she can have his eggs. Again, she is doing the right thing here, but we can understand why Viserys gets more mad at this. Dany is commanding and telling him to do things when he is the rightful king in his mind. That's the whole thing here that's really pissing Viserys off, is he's being commanded. He's being told to do things. He's being laughed at. His pride is being wounded. Everything that you could possibly do to Viserys is happening when it comes to verbal, and in his mind, infuriating him. But Jorah agrees, telling him to do this before he gets them all killed. Viserys says they can't kill us in this city, but he can, as he bars his sword at her, and says to tell Drogo he wants his crown. He bought you, but never paid for her. He can keep the baby if he wants. He will cut it out of her. All the while, Dany notes how he is crying. Again, like we just talked about, Viserys is a broken man. He has nothing left. He's, again, intoxicated, and he's made a joke. He's been made a fool. And as Dany notes, he is no longer her brother. It's a sad moment because Dany comes to this realization. Again, Viserys has his sword on her, like right where Rhaego is inside of her. And this is the moment where Dany realizes she has to lose her brother, right? She's been defending him, protecting him, trying to do all these things, but he's now threatened to kill her child. And that's something that, again, I'm not a father, I'm not a mother, but just going off of people that I know, and I think almost all mothers would defend their child to the last. And this is that moment, right? It's Dany going cold to Viserys. It's that moment in which everything flips in Dany's head, and it's the end of this relationship, basically. But that gets us into page 499. She then tells Viserys she would tell Drogo, and as she told him, she knew he understood as he stepped down from his seat. Viserys asks what he said, and Dany notes how she went cold all over as she tells him he shall have a splendid golden crown that men will tremble before it. And this is I think the hardest part of this is, like, again, Viserys has done things that you just can't take back. He's crossed that line. But it's so sad when you think about Viserys lowers his sword and he smiles, and because this is all he's ever wanted. some acknowledgement, and to be who he's supposed to be, or who he thinks in his mind who he's supposed to be, attaining that respect, to have this crown. And that was the hardest part for Dany, of seeing all of this. But it shows that Dany understands Viserys, and it pains her to do so, but Viserys has gone too far. In his desperation and lust for power and validation, he has condemned himself to death. Drogo then reaches her, and Drogo, in one word, has his blood riders on Viserys, restraining him and shattering his wrist. Viserys is shocked, right? He is the last of the dragons in his mind. He is the king, and he notes they cannot touch him. He is the dragon. He is to be crowned. Again, still living in that fantasy. Drogo then removes his belt, melting it, and taking some horsehair mittens to lift the pot of melted gold up. Viserys began to scream, seeing his death coming, squirming and kicking. Jorah then comes to Dany, telling her to look away. This isn't going to be a pleasant sight, right? Like, he's about to get literally melted gold poured on the top of his head. Like, it's not a pretty sight. But that gets us to page 500. What a way to start the 500s. But Dany says no as she crosses her arms around her belly, again showing that she's being protective of her child. Viserys has basically threatened to kill her child. Viserys tries one last time, a plea, saying, "Sister, please, Dany, tell them, make them sweet sister." Again, he tries. He tries to play on Dany's heartstrings, but it's too late. Dany, she's tired of forgiving him. She's tired of protecting him. He's made up his own bed, and now he's got to lie in it. And at this, Drogo took the pots with boiling hot gold and says, "Here, crown for Cart King," and poured it onto the man who used to be Dany's brother. I will say I actually like the way that D&D adapted this scene in the show. I think for me personally, I like just a crown for a king and pours it. The Cart King, I understand why it's there, because it references, why he's gotten that name of being a king and all of that, and Swordfoot King and all the other names. Personally, I do think it's just nicer to say crown for a king, but it still works really well from George. It's just this moment where it's like, wow, Viserys is dead, right? The last male Targaryen is gone. And yeah, it's a really great moment. It's just the payoff of Viserys and Dany's relationship, of Dany watching her brother die. And she is basically the one that condemns him to death, right? I think Viserys was the one who condemned himself, but Dany allowed it to happen. And it's a really interesting moment here. When you look at, like, if we go later in the story, with Dany and maybe she becomes more of a villain, like so many people have suggested. This is a moment we look back on and we go, was very brutal. Now we understand why Dany doesn't, and I don't think anyone feels bad or says that Dany is wrong for this. Like, this dude literally tried to kill her, like basically put his sword up and basically said he would cut out her child. Like, I think she's pretty justified in Viserys dying here, as well as breaking all Dothraki culture and being this abusive person. But it's also something interesting when we look at later on, when it comes to young Riff. Think about how much she protected Viserys and how much she longs for having family. That's something that's going to come into her arc when we get to young Riff, and whether he is a Targaryen or a Blackfire, and how all that's going to end up working. But the hideous noise that Viserys made when it all happened, the helmet formed on his head, and the gold oozing down his body as his body hits the floor. Dany then calmly thinks he was no dragon. Fire cannot kill a dragon, which I also found was really weird, given that this wasn't exactly fire. It was more like gold. One, it melted him, but two, it completely formed around his head and shrunk his head in. Dany, it's not really about the fire in this situation. If Drogo did the same thing to you, you would also die. So, but yeah, a really badass ending. It's a fantastic chapter. I think of the, chapters we've gone through so far, easily a top 5 chapter for me. I wonder where this chapter is going to sit by the end of it, because I am ranking all of these chapters each week. putting them on a Google Doc, and I will like talk about them when we get through the book. But I wonder where this one's going to be by the end of the book, because there's just so many good chapters we're going to start getting into now. And next week we're getting back into Ned, and it's a big one with Robert's death. So thank you guys all for watching. I hope you guys all enjoyed. I really did enjoy doing this video. I really have loved all of Dany's chapters so far in this early part of the book, and I think her relationship with Viserys is one of my favorite elements of Dany's character throughout all of the books, and it's nice ending to that. And yeah, thank you guys all for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye, guys.